The impact rattled Cade's teeth as the evacuation pod crashed through Valaris 4's atmosphere. Alarm klaxons blared, but they seemed distant through the ringing in his ears. The transport ship carrying him and 24 other rescue engineers had been struck by something, debris perhaps, or weapons fire. He couldn't be sure. All he knew was that the prisoner transport section had detonated first, sending shock waves through the entire vessel. Cade's pod tumbled through clouds of crystalline ice, the viewport frosting over almost immediately. His training kicked in despite the chaos. He braced, knees up, arms crossed over his chest, eyes squeezed shut as the pod slammed into the frozen surface of Valaris 4, skidded across the ice plains, and finally came to rest among a field of jagged black stone formations. Silence fell. The pod's systems flickered, died, then partially returned. The emergency lighting bathed everything in a sickly orange glow. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the viewport. Transport Alpha. This is Engineer Cade Terran. Pod ejection successful, but severe damage to navigation and comms. Request immediate extraction, he said into his helmet comm. Static answered him. He repeated the distress call twice more before giving up. Survival protocol dictated he should remain with the pod. It had limited life support, emergency rations, and a functioning distress beacon. But experience told him the difference between procedure and reality could be measured in frozen corpses. If the distress beacon was compromised, he'd be just another statistic. Better to secure additional supplies, find better shelter, or locate other survivors. Cade checked his environment suit's integrity, intact with 76 hours of air, then gathered what supplies he could salvage from the pod. A portable heater, emergency rations, basic medical supplies, and his engineer's toolkit. He synced his helmet's heads-up display with the pod's last navigation data and saw he was approximately 12 kilometers from what appeared to be a supply depot. Whether it was abandoned or operational, it represented his best chance. The blizzard had intensified by the time Cade sealed the pod and stepped onto Valaris 4's surface. Wind screamed across the ice plains, driving needles of snow against his faceplate. Visibility was less than 20 meters. His suit's temperature regulators strained against the minus 70-degree cold. Adjusting his pack, he oriented himself toward the depot and began to walk. 3 grueling hours later, Cade crested a ridge and spotted a dark shape through the swirling snow. The depot was partially buried in ice, its upper sections jutting from the ground like the spine of some ancient creature. As he approached, he saw the damage. Part of the structure had been sheared away, exposing corridors and rooms to the elements. The catastrophic structural failure suggested an impact event, not unlike what had happened to his own ship. Cade approached cautiously. The main entrance was blocked by collapsed ceiling panels, but a breach in the eastern wall provided access. He squeezed through, scanner sweeping for hazards. The interior was dark, emergency lighting functioning only in patches. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. "Hello," he called. "Any survivors?" Earth Alliance Rescue responding. Only the whistling of wind through broken walls answered him. The depot had been abandoned for some time, judging by the ice formations inside. His scanner showed barely functioning power systems, but perhaps enough to power critical systems if he could reach the generator room. Cade moved deeper into the facility, checking rooms for supplies. Most had been stripped clean, either by evacuation protocols or scavengers. In what appeared to be a mess hall, he found freeze-dried ration packs overlooked beneath fallen debris. Not much, but enough to extend his survival time. The living quarters revealed little of use. Personal effects abandoned in haste, frozen solid now. Cade pressed on toward the facility's core, where generators and communication equipment would be housed. At least there, he might be able to boost his distress signal or patch into colony networks to call for help. He was passing a corridor marked Secure Containment when his scanner picked up an anomalous reading. Heat, faint but distinct from the ambient cold. Biological in origin. Someone, or something, was alive down there. Cade hesitated. Secure Containment suggested prisoners or dangerous specimens. The heat signature was barely registering, meaning whatever it was either small or in a deep hibernation state. It could be a threat. It could also be a survivor who needed help. As a rescue engineer, his duty was clear despite the risk. The containment section was sealed by a heavy security door, its electronic locks dead without power. Cade retrieved a portable power cell from his pack and connected it to the door's emergency override. The mechanism grudgingly came to life, ancient gears grinding as the door slid partially open, just enough for him to slip through. Beyond was a corridor lined with transparent cryocells, most shattered or empty. The dim emergency lighting cast everything in bloody shadows. Cade moved slowly, scanner raised. The heat signature was coming from the last cell on the right. Unlike the others, this cell was intact, though its cryo systems were failing. Frost covered parts of the transparent wall, but Cade could see through to the occupant within. His breath caught. It wasn't human. The figure inside was female in form, but clearly alien, tall, with pale blue skin and a distinctly non-human skeletal structure visible beneath the thin prison garment. Her arms and legs were secured by heavy alloy restraints. Even in suspended animation, her muscles appeared dense and powerful, her entire form designed for combat efficiency. A Zenthri warrior. Cade had seen them before, but only in military footage or propaganda videos. The Zenthri had been the Alliance's most formidable enemies during the interplanetary wars, bioengineered soldiers designed for conquest and reproduction. The war was over now, had been for years. This one was likely being transported to a research facility when whatever disaster befell this outpost occurred. Her cryocell's life support was failing. Without intervention, she would die within hours. Protocol said to leave her. Zenthri were classified as hostile combatants. But the war was over, and she was helpless. Cade's rescue training warred with military protocol as he studied the control panel on her cell. With a decision that would alter the course of his life, Cade connected his power cell to the cryo unit and initiated the revival sequence. The system hummed to life, beginning the careful process of raising body temperature and stimulating neural activity. It would take approximately 20 minutes for the cycle to complete. Cade used the time to search nearby rooms for anything useful. In what appeared to be a guard station, he found a portable heater and additional rations. He was examining a weapons locker, empty, naturally, when a crash from the containment area sent him running back. The Zenthri female had awakened faster than expected. She had torn free of her restraints and was now standing in the center of the open cryo cell, her muscles tensed, eyes darting, analyzing her surroundings with predatory focus. When she saw Cade, she froze. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Cade remained still, arms slightly raised to show he was not reaching for a weapon. The Zenthri's eyes, solid violet with no discernible pupils, assessed him with cold calculation. Then, to his shock, she dropped to her knees and lowered her head. "My body is strong, human," she said in heavily accented but understandable common. "I'll give you strong children, if you keep me alive." The bluntness of her statement stunned Cade into silence. She remained kneeling, her posture showing submission, but her eyes never left his face. He could see intelligence there, and something else. A desperate calculation. "That won't be necessary," Cade finally managed. "I'm not here to. That's not why I revived you." The Zenthri tilted her head slightly, clearly confused. "Then why?" Cade struggled to explain the simple, humane impulse that had guided his decision. "Because you would have died otherwise. The facility's power is failing. No one deserves to die like that, frozen and alone." She considered this, clearly finding his explanation suspect. "You are a soldier? A scientist? What is your purpose with me?" "I'm a rescue engineer. My transport crashed. I'm just trying to survive until extraction comes." Cade lowered his arms slowly. "Do you have a name?" "I am Syrah," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Unit designation X7-943. Combat and Reproduction Specialist." She recited this like an identification code, practiced and impersonal. "I'm Cade. Cade Taryn." He gestured to the corridor behind him. This place is compromised. I need to find a working communications array, or at least better shelter. You're welcome to come with me. Sierra rose to her feet in a single fluid motion. You have freed me from containment. I am obligated to serve. No, that's not. Cade stopped, realizing the cultural divide between them might be too vast a bridge in this moment. You're not obligated. But two survivors have a better chance than one. We can help each other. Sierra studied him, clearly trying to decipher his true intent. Your proposal is logical. I will assist you in finding shelter and communication. Without further discussion, she moved past Cade toward the containment exit, her movements silent and efficient despite her recent revival. Cade followed, keeping a cautious distance. He had saved her life, but he wasn't naive. Zenthri were engineered killers. If she decided he was a threat, his survival odds would plummet drastically. They explored the facility together, communicating sparingly. Cade was surprised by Sierra's knowledge of human technology. She quickly determined that the main generator was beyond repair, but helped him salvage power cells from secondary systems. The communications array had been destroyed in whatever catastrophe hit the station, but they discovered a central hub room that was relatively intact, with reinforced walls and a functional emergency heating system. As night fell outside, they established a defensible position in the hub. Cade set up the portable heater while Sierra arranged their meager supplies with military precision. The growing darkness outside was absolute, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning in the distance. Electrical storms common to Valaris 4's permanent winter. The silence between them stretched, uncomfortable and tense. Cade tried not to stare at his alien companion, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Her movements were too precise, her stillness too complete. She reminded him of a predator, motionless until the moment of attack. How long were you in cryo? He asked, finally breaking the silence. Sierra looked up from examining a piece of equipment. Unknown. My last active deployment was the Ceres Offensive. Cade blinked in surprise. That was 3 years ago. The war ended 2 years back. The war is over. Something flickered in her violet eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. Peace treaty signed at Proxima Centauri. There's been a ceasefire and prisoner exchanges. Sierra processed this information with a slight narrowing of her eyes. Then why was I in containment here? Cade had wondered the same thing. I don't know. This facility seems to have been damaged or abandoned in a hurry. Records might be in the central database if we can get it powered up. A distant metallic groan echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of settling ice. Sierra's head snapped toward the noise, her body tensing. Structural instability, Cade said. This place took heavy damage. No, Sierra replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something else. What do you mean? She closed her eyes, seeming to listen intently. Mechanical, rhythmic, moving. Cade strained his ears, but heard nothing beyond the wind and creaking metal. Could be automated systems trying to function, or wildlife. Sierra opened her eyes, fixing him with an intense stare. There is no wildlife on Valaris 4. Nothing survives the surface conditions. The implication hung between them, unspoken. If something was moving out there, it was either human, alien, or machine. None of those options were particularly comforting. We should take watches, Cade suggested. I'll go first. You need to rest after cryo revival. To his surprise, Sierra nodded in agreement. Wake me in 4 hours. She settled against the wall, positioning herself where she could see both Cade and the entrance. Within moments, her breathing had slowed, though Cade suspected she wasn't fully asleep. More likely a combat rest state, alert to danger even while recovering. Alone with his thoughts, Cade contemplated the strange turn his mission had taken. He'd been part of a routine prisoner transport escort, engineering support in case of mechanical failures. Now he was stranded on a galaxy's icebox with a Zenthri warrior, possibly being stalked by unknown entities. Memories he'd worked hard to suppress began to surface. His wife Lena and their daughter Mira killed when Zenthri forces bombed the civilian settlement on Titan. He'd buried himself in rescue work after their deaths, taking the most dangerous assignments, half hoping each would be his last. Survivor's guilt, his psych evaluator called it. Cade called it punishment. And now he was responsible for keeping a Zenthri alive, one of the race that had taken everything from him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Neither was the fact that, despite everything, he couldn't bring himself to hate Syrah specifically. She was a soldier, a tool, and from what he'd learned during the war, Zenthri warriors had no more choice in their roles than the weapons they carried. Her first words to him lingered in his mind. "I'll give you strong children." It spoke volumes about how she'd been conditioned to view her own worth as a breeding machine for warriors. The thought sickened him. Outside, the storm intensified. Cade checked his oxygen levels and supplies, made notes in his survival log, and tried to formulate a plan for the coming days. If the extraction team followed standard procedure, they would track his pod's beacon first. Finding it empty, they would expand their search based on his last known coordinates, assuming they hadn't written off the entire mission as a loss. The rational part of him knew his chances were slim. The emotional part refused to give up. For hours passed. True to his word, Cade woke Syrah with a gentle call of her name. He was careful not to touch her, suspecting her combat reflexes might react badly. She opened her eyes immediately, fully alert. Status: all quiet. Storm's getting worse outside. He handed her a ration bar. Not sure if you could digest our food, but it's better than nothing. Syrah accepted the bar, examining it briefly before taking a small bite. She nodded once, apparently finding acceptable. "Get some rest," she said. "I will watch." Cade hesitated. Despite their temporary alliance, he couldn't quite bring himself to sleep in the presence of a trained Zenthri warrior. His rational mind said she had no reason to harm him. His instincts screamed caution. Syrah seemed to read his hesitation. "I will not harm you while you sleep, Cade Taryn. You saved my life. By the combat code, I am honor-bound to preserve yours until the debt is settled." It wasn't the most reassuring promise, but it was something. Exhaustion won out over caution. Cade settled against the wall, positioning himself where he could keep Syrah in his peripheral vision. Despite his intention to remain semi-alert, the day's exertions claimed him quickly, pulling him into deep sleep. He dreamed of Lena and Mira, of their home on Titan before the war reached them. In the dream, he was returning from a routine engineering assignment, laden with small gifts for his family. But as he approached their dwelling, it changed, transforming into the wreckage he'd found upon his actual return. In the dream, though, something moved in the rubble, something alive. Cade jerked awake, disoriented, heart racing. The hub room was darker than before. The portable heater had dimmed to conserve power. Syrah was a silhouette against the faint glow, still seated in the same position, watching the entrance. "You called out in your sleep," she said without turning. "Names: Lena, Mira." Cade swallowed, his throat dry. "My wife and daughter. They are on Earth. They're dead. Titan colony. Zenthri bombing run." He hadn't meant to be so blunt, but the words spilled out, sharp with old pain. Syrah went very still. "I was deployed to Titan," she said after a long moment. 3 combat drops. Many humans died. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Cade felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by hollow emptiness. Even if Syrah had directly participated in the attack that killed his family, she had been following orders engineered and conditioned from birth for exactly that purpose. His hatred belonged to the architects of the war, not their tools. "It doesn't matter now," he said finally. "The war's over. Yet it continues in memory," Syrah observed, showing unexpected insight. "For both our kinds." Before Cade could respond, a distinct mechanical sound penetrated the silence. The unmistakable whir of servos and hydraulics, followed by a heavy impact that vibrated through the floor. This time, there was no mistaking it for settling ice or structural failure. Syrah was on her feet in an instant, moving to the entrance. "It's closer." Cade joined her, scanner in hand. "What do you think it is?" "Reclaimer," she said, the word loaded with dread. "Old war machine. Semi-autonomous. Designed to collect genetic material from battlefields." "Genetic material?" from fallen soldiers, especially Zinthri. She gestured to herself. We are valuable property. Even our corpses contain useful genetic sequences for the next generation of warriors. The implications turned Cade's stomach. But the war's over. Why would it still be active? Reclaimers operate on simple algorithms. Find compatible genetic material. Collect. Return to processing centers. Syrah's expression hardened. They do not recognize peace treaties. Another impact, closer this time. Whatever it was methodically searching the facility. We need to move, Cade whispered. Is there another way out of this section? Syrah pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor. Subsystems access. Leads to lower levels. They gathered their supplies quickly and silently. Cade pried open the hatch, revealing a narrow service tunnel below. Syrah descended first, her movements fluid despite the confined space. Cade followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them. The tunnel was barely large enough for them to crawl through. Syrah led, navigating by some internal sense of direction that impressed Cade. They moved carefully, mindful of any sound that might attract attention from above. After 4 hours, Cade woke Syrah for her watch. She transitioned instantly from sleep to full alertness, assessing the chamber with a quick scan before focusing on him. Status report, she requested. Communications signal still transmitting. No sign of additional threats. Cade gestured to the bunk. Your turn to rest. And don't argue. Those ribs need time to heal. To his surprise, Syrah didn't protest. Wake me if the signal receives a response, she said, easing himself onto the bunk with a barely perceptible wince. Sleep claimed Cade almost immediately despite the hard floor. He dreamed of Titan again, but differently this time. In this dream, he walked through the ruins of his former home, but wasn't alone. Syrah walked beside him, pointing out structural weaknesses, suggesting improvements. Building rather than destroying. He woke confused by the imagery, but somehow lighter. 8 days passed in the relative safety of the geothermal chamber. They established a routine, maintaining equipment, monitoring communications, rationing supplies. Syrah's wound healed with remarkable speed, her engineered physiology efficiently repairing the damage. Cade's bruised ribs improved more slowly, but steadily. They spoke more during this time, cautious exchanges that gradually built understanding. Cade learned about Zinthri society, or rather, the absence of what humans would consider society. Syrah had been grown in a birthing chamber, one of thousands of specialized units created for the war effort. Her genetic template had been optimized for both combat efficiency and reproduction capacity, a combination the Zinthri leadership valued for producing new generations of warriors. We are not permitted individual designations until after proving combat effectiveness, she explained one evening as they shared a meal of reconstituted rations. I became Syrah after my first successful deployment. Before that, I was only my unit code. Who named you? Cade asked. The combat director assigned the designation. So you didn't choose your own name? Syrah seemed puzzled by the question. Why would a weapon choose its own designation? You're not a weapon, Cade said quietly. You're a person. Person implies individuality. Zinthri units are components of a collective war machine. She said this without bitterness, simply stating what she'd been taught to believe. And now that the war is over, what does that make you? Syrah had no answer for this. The question seemed to trouble her deeply, opening possibilities she'd never considered. On the 9th day, something changed. Syrah, who had been examining the Reclaimer's remains for useful components, suddenly went still, her head tilted in a listening posture. What is it? Cade asked, immediately alert. The thermal vents. Air pressure changes. She moved to a maintenance panel, placing her palm against it. Something is approaching from below. They armed themselves with improvised weapons and took defensive positions. Minutes stretched into an hour with nothing but the normal sounds of the geothermal systems. Cade was beginning to think Syrah had misinterpreted routine pressure fluctuations when a new sound became audible, a rhythmic scraping coming from within the largest thermal duct. Without warning, the duct's access panel burst open. Cade raised his makeshift weapon, then froze in shock. What emerged wasn't another reclaimer, but a humanoid figure in an Alliance environmental suit. Engineer Terran. The figure's voice crackled through an external speaker. Captain Lewis, Alliance Rescue. We picked up your distress signal. Relief flooded through Cade, so intense it made his knees weak. Captain. Yes, I'm Terran. How did you find us? Your signal was weak, but detectable within the system. When we found your empty pod, we tracked thermal anomalies. The captain's gaze shifted to Syrah, who remained in a defensive posture. I see you're not alone. This is Syrah, Cade said, deliberately omitting her Zenthri designation. She helped me survive. Captain Lewis studied the alien woman with obvious caution. Zenthri? Irregular, but not unprecedented since the treaty. We'll sort it out once we're back on the ship. She gestured to the thermal duct. My team has secured a route back to our shuttle. It's a difficult climb, but manageable. We need to move quickly. Another storm system is approaching. They gathered essential supplies and followed Lewis through the thermal duct, beginning a grueling ascent through Valaris 4's subterranean infrastructure. 2 additional rescue team members met them partway, offering support for the final climb to the surface. The storm was already beginning when they emerged into the bitter cold. The Alliance shuttle waited nearby, engines running, its entry ramp lowered. They rushed toward it, fighting against the strengthening wind. As they approached the shuttle, Syrah suddenly stopped. Cade turned, confused. Syrah? What's wrong? She stood rigid, eyes fixed on the shuttle and the Alliance personnel visible inside. They will take me for processing. What? No, they won't. The war's over. I am an unregistered Zenthri combatant. Standard protocol requires biological containment and analysis. Captain Lewis had noticed their exchange. Is there a problem? Give us a moment, Cade called back, then moved closer to Syrah. Listen to me. I won't let them treat you like a specimen. You're coming with me as a survivor, not a prisoner. Syrah's expression was more vulnerable than he'd ever seen it. I do not wish to be collected, analyzed, bred. Her eyes met his, intense and determined. I would rather die free on this planet. No one's going to die, Cade insisted, and no one's going to be bred or analyzed against their will. Not while I'm around. Do you trust me? The question hung between them, loaded with significance beyond this moment. Syrah studied his face, searching for deception or weakness. Finding none, she gave a single nod. Then come with me, he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Together, they walked toward the shuttle. As expected, complications arose immediately upon boarding. The medical officer wanted to place Syrah in quarantine. The security officer suggested restraints as a precaution. Captain Lewis observed the debate with practical concern. She saved my life, Cade stated firmly, positioning himself between Syrah and the others. Multiple times, she fights reclaimers with her bare hands and repairs ventilation systems without protection. And she's coming with me as a free individual, not a specimen or prisoner. Regulations state, the security officer began. I'll take full responsibility, Cade interrupted. Document whatever you need to in your report. But she stays with me. Captain Lewis studied him thoughtfully, then nodded. Your call, engineer. But she's your responsibility until we reach Alliance space. The flight to the rescue vessel was tense but uneventful. Syrah remained close to Cade, observing everything with cautious attention. When they boarded the larger ship, she marveled silently at the technology, so different from Zenthri vessels, designed for efficiency rather than intimidation. They were assigned shared quarters due to Cade's insistence that Syrah not be separated from him. As the door closed behind them, leaving them truly alone for the first time since their rescue, an awkward silence fell. Thank you, Syrah said finally, for preventing my containment. You're welcome, Cade replied, setting down his few possessions. But this is just the beginning. There will be questions when we reach Alliance space. Paperwork. Decisions about your status. What will happen to me? The question was asked with genuine uncertainty. Perhaps the first time Syrah had ever contemplated a future she couldn't predict. That depends partly on what you want, Cade said. The treaty includes provisions for Zinthri integration. There are rehabilitation programs, education opportunities, or you could seek asylum in the neutral zones. Sira absorbed this information silently, then asked a question that caught Cade off guard. What will you do? He hadn't thought that far ahead. For so long, his life had been defined by loss and the reckless assignments he took to escape his grief. Now, strangely, he found himself contemplating possibilities. I'm not sure, he admitted. Continue with rescue work? Probably. But maybe be more selective about assignments. Take some time between missions. Will you seek a new mate to replace your lost one? The bluntness of the question stung, but Cade recognized it wasn't meant to hurt. No one can replace Lena. Or Mira. But someday, maybe I'll be open to new connections. Sira nodded, processing this. When we first met, I offered to give you children. It was not. She struggled to find the right words. It was not a choice. It was programming. Survival protocol when captured. I know, Cade said gently. The words were not true, she continued, the admission clearly difficult. They were what I was designed to say when vulnerable, to ensure genetic preservation. I understand. Sira stepped closer, her intense gaze fixed on his. But now I have had 10 days to observe you, to learn, to choose. Her voice softened. If someday we created life together, it would not be because of programming or protocol. It would be because I wanted something of us to continue. The declaration left Cade speechless. It was neither a romantic overture nor a practical proposition. It was something more profound. The first truly autonomous choice Sira had ever expressed about her own body and future. That's quite a statement he finally managed. It was not a request, Sira clarified. Merely a truth I wish to speak before we return to your world. Cade found himself smiling, the first genuine smile since before the crash. Well, there's time to figure all that out. One day at a time. As the ship accelerated toward Alliance space, they stood together at the viewport, watching Valaris 4 diminish behind them. The ice planet that had nearly killed them, and in doing so, had given them both a reason to truly live again. What is that? Sira asked, pointing to the first rays of light appearing around the curve of the planet as the system's distant sun began to illuminate its edge. Dawn, Cade answered. The beginning of a new day. Sira watched the spreading light with wonder. In Zinthri combat philosophy, dawn is considered the optimal time for ending lives. She turned to Cade, her expression transformed by the simple act of making her own observation. I think I prefer to see it as a beginning. Cade gently took her hand in his. So do I. Together, they watched the light grow stronger, neither one speaking of the challenges that awaited them or the uncertain path ahead. For now, it was enough to have survived, to have found understanding across an impossible divide, and to face the future not as weapons or victims, but as individuals who had chosen each other when all other choices were taken away. In that moment, as the light of a new day washed over them, Cade realized that perhaps this was what healing truly meant. Not forgetting the past, but finding the courage to build something new from its ashes. And as Sira's hand tightened around his, he knew she understood it too. What felt like hours of crawling through increasingly narrow passages, they emerged into a larger chamber, some kind of storage or processing room, long abandoned. Ice coated the walls and floor, and their breath fogged in the freezing air. Temperatures dropping, Cade noted, checking his suit readouts. Power must be failing in this section too. Sira moved to a control panel, brushing away ice and frost. This facility has multiple power grids. If we can access a functional section, we may find better shelter and communications. She began working on the panel, her fingers deft despite the cold. Cade marveled at her resilience. She wore only the thin prisoner garment, yet showed no signs of discomfort in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Aren't you cold? He asked. Sira glanced at him briefly. Zinthri are engineered for extreme climate tolerance. This is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. She returned to the panel. Your thermal readings are declining. You require better protection. It was the first time she'd expressed concern for his welfare beyond their survival pact. Cade wasn't sure how to respond. The panel suddenly lit up under Syrah's ministrations. Auxiliary power restored to this grid section. She examined the facility schematic that appeared. There's a geothermal tap 3 levels down. Still functional. It would provide sustainable heat and possibly power for communications. Can we get there without running into our mechanical friend upstairs? Uncertain, but staying here guarantees eventual discovery or termination. She indicated his environment suit. How much oxygen remains? Cade checked. 42 hours. Then we have no choice. We move to the geothermal level. They found a service elevator, its emergency systems still operational. As they descended, Cade felt the temperature rising noticeably, a good sign that the geothermal systems were still functioning. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a humid, warm corridor dimly lit by red emergency lighting. This is maintenance level for the primary heat exchangers, Syrah said, studying their surroundings. The core access should be ahead. The corridor opened into a vast chamber dominated by massive machinery. Pumps, pipes, and heat exchangers drawing thermal energy from deep within Valaris 4's crust. Unlike the upper levels, this area showed no signs of structural damage or ice. Steam hissed from various vents, creating an almost tropical atmosphere compared to the frozen wasteland above. This is perfect, Cade said, removing his helmet as he scanned the room. The machinery's shielding should mask our heat signatures. And look, there's a maintenance bunk over there. Indeed, a small living area had been set up for engineers who needed to monitor the geothermal systems. It included basic amenities, bunks, a food preparation station, even primitive washing facilities utilizing the abundant hot water. For the first time since the crash, Cade felt a surge of genuine hope. We could survive here for weeks, if necessary. Maybe even get a communication signal boosted through the thermal vents. Syrah was examining the machinery with professional interest. These systems are still linked to the facility's main grid. With proper adjustments, we could restore power to selected areas above. Communications would be the priority, Cade said, setting down his pack and beginning to unload their supplies. They worked together efficiently, establishing their new shelter and assessing resources. The maintenance area included emergency rations, tools, and even spare clothing, standard-issue maintenance uniforms that would be far more practical for Syrah than her prison garment. Cade busied himself with checking the communication equipment, while Syrah changed in a separate area. When she emerged wearing the dark gray maintenance coveralls, Cade was struck by how different she appeared. Without the prison garment marking her as alien and captive, she looked almost ordinary, still unmistakably Zenthari, but no longer a warrior or prisoner, just another survivor. The garments are functional, she said, noticing his gaze. Though designed for human proportions, they'll be warmer than what you had, Cade replied, turning back to the communications console. I think I can get this working with parts from my toolkit, but it'll take time. Syrah joined him at the console. I can assist. I have knowledge of communication systems. Cade raised an eyebrow in surprise. Combat and reproduction specialist with communications training. All Zenthari units receive multiple specialization training, she explained, to maximize deployment value. Again, the clinical way she referred to herself as a unit with deployment value disturbed Cade. But now wasn't the time to address it. They worked side by side for hours, dismantling equipment, improvising connections, testing circuits. Syrah's technical knowledge proved impressive, her suggestions often elegant in their efficiency. When a particularly delicate connection required reaching into a narrow access panel surrounded by live circuitry, she did so without hesitation, her slender fingers manipulating components while ignoring the electrical burns that scored her skin. "You're hurting yourself," Cade protested when he saw the burns. Syrah examined her injured fingers with clinical detachment. Minor damage. Functional capacity remains acceptable. Cade took her hand, applying medicated gel from his first aid kit to the burns. "That's not the point. We don't need to rush this at the expense of injury." Sierra watched with curious intensity as he treated her wounds. You use medical supplies on me that you might need for yourself later. This is inefficient resource allocation. It's called taking care of each other, Cade replied. That's how you survive long-term. Not by calculating efficiency, but by making sure everyone makes it through. She considered this concept with evident confusion. In Zen-3 units, damaged members are repurposed or recycled. Resources are always prioritized for optimal combat effectiveness. Well, we're not a combat unit. We're just two people trying to stay alive. He finished treating her burns and released her hand. And I don't subscribe to treating people as disposable resources. Even Zen-3 who may have killed your family? The question was posed without emotion, purely analytical. Cade paused, taken aback by her directness. Even then, he said finally, that's what separates us from machines like the Reclaimer. We can choose to be better than our programming. Sierra tilted her head slightly, absorbing this idea. An interesting philosophical position. Impractical in warfare, but perhaps valuable in peace. Before Cade could respond, a distant boom resonated through the facility, followed by the now familiar sound of mechanical movement. It's found a way down, Sierra said, immediately alert. We must accelerate our efforts or prepare to relocate. They redoubled their work on the communication system, racing against the methodical advance of the Reclaimer. Finally, after several tense hours, they managed to establish a rudimentary signal. It's weak, Cade said, adjusting the output, but if there's an Alliance vessel within the system, they might pick it up. The Reclaimer will detect the transmission, Sierra warned. It will come directly for us now. As if confirming her words, they heard the mechanical sounds growing louder, more purposeful. We have to hide, Cade said, gathering essential supplies. The maintenance tunnels. No. Sierra's voice was firm. The tunnels are too confined. No tactical advantage. We would be trapped. She moved to a tool rack, selecting a heavy piston spanner. We must disable it. With hand tools? That's suicide. It's programmed to collect me intact if possible. That creates an exploitation opportunity. I can engage while you circle behind and disable its primary motivators. The plan was desperate, but Cade couldn't think of a better alternative. He selected tools that might serve as weapons or sabotage implements and followed Sierra's lead. They positioned themselves in the main geothermal chamber, using machinery for cover. The waiting was excruciating, each moment stretched by tension and the steadily approaching sounds of their hunter. When the Reclaimer finally appeared, Cade's breath caught in his throat. It was larger than he'd imagined, a hulking mechanical monstrosity of articulated limbs and specialized appendages. Its central mass held various containment pods, some empty, others filled with unidentifiable organic material. A cluster of sensors rotated atop its frame, scanning methodically. Sierra caught Cade's eye from her position across the chamber, giving a slight nod. Then, without warning, she stepped into the open. The Reclaimer's sensors immediately locked onto her. It issued a series of clicks and whirs, analyzing her genetic signature. Appendages shifted, reconfiguring from collection to capture mode. It advanced on Sierra, who backed away slowly, leading it away from Cade's position. Cade moved the moment the machine's attention was fully on Sierra, circling behind it as quietly as possible. He could see what might be critical components, hydraulic lines, sensor clusters, power couplings, but which would disable it without triggering a catastrophic response. Sierra was fully engaged now, dodging capture appendages with astonishing speed and agility. The Reclaimer compensated, its programming adapting to her evasion tactics. One appendage grazed her shoulder, tearing the coverall and drawing blue blood. Cade made his decision. A cluster of cables at the machine's rear junction seemed to connect to its primary sensor array. He lunged forward, jamming a screwdriver deep into the junction and twisting with all his strength. The Reclaimer convulsed, its appendages flailing wildly. One massive limb swung blindly, catching Cade squarely in the chest and sending him flying across the chamber. He slammed into a heat exchanger, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Through blurred vision, he saw Sira leap onto the disoriented machine, driving her spanner into what appeared to be a secondary sensor cluster. The reclaimer thrashed, one pointed appendage catching her midsection. Sira gasped but didn't retreat, instead using the impalement to stabilize herself as she continued attacking the machine's vulnerable points. Cade forced himself to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs. He grabbed a length of pipe and rejoined the fight, targeting the hydraulic lines he'd identified earlier. Together, they inflicted critical damage on the machine until it finally collapsed, its systems failing catastrophically. In the sudden silence that followed, Cade became aware of Sira's labored breathing. She was leaning against a generator housing, one hand pressed to her side where dark blue blood seeped between her fingers. "You're hurt," he said, moving to her side. "Damage. Significant," she admitted, her voice strained. "But not terminal." Cade helped her to the maintenance area, where he could better assess her injuries. The puncture wound was deep, penetrating her lower thoracic cavity. For a human, it would likely be fatal. But Zenthri physiology was different, redundant systems, enhanced healing capabilities. "I need to clean and close this," he said, gathering medical supplies. Sira watched him prepare with detached curiosity. "Why do you continue to expend resources on me? Our combat effectiveness as a unit is severely compromised now. In Zenthri protocol, I would be left behind." "Well, I'm not Zenthri," Cade replied, cleaning the wound carefully. "And I don't leave people behind, not when there's a chance." As he worked to stabilize her injury, Cade became uncomfortably aware of their proximity. Sira's alien physiology was both familiar and strange beneath his hands. Humanoid in general form, but with significant differences in structure and function. Her skin was cooler than a human's, with a subtle texture like fine suede. Despite her injury, her muscles remained tensed, ready for action. "You need to relax," he told her. "I can't treat this effectively if you're wound tight as a spring." Sira made a visible effort to comply, though it clearly went against her combat conditioning. "The offering I made when we first met," she said suddenly. "It disturbed you." Cade's hands stilled momentarily. "It was unexpected, yet it is my purpose, to fight and to reproduce, to create stronger warriors for the next deployment." She spoke without emotion, as if reciting facts from a manual. "It is what gives me value. Is that what you want?" Cade asked, continuing his treatment. To be valued only for fighting and breeding? The question seemed to confuse her. Want is irrelevant. Function determines purpose. Not for sentient beings, Cade argued. You're more than your programming or your genetics. You can choose what gives your life meaning. Sira was silent for a long moment. "The war is over," she said finally. "If I cannot fight or breed warriors, what purpose remains?" "That's something you'll have to discover for yourself," Cade replied. "But right now, your purpose is to survive, to heal, and to help me get off this ice ball." He finished treating her wound as best he could with limited supplies. "You need rest. The bunk is yours." "Unnecessary. I can maintain optimal function with minimal recovery periods." "You require the bunk, more due to your injuries." "How about we take shifts?" Cade suggested, compromising. "You rest first. I'll monitor the communications and keep watch in case our friend had teammates." Sira accepted this logic and moved to the bunk, though she positioned herself to maintain visual contact with both Cade and the chamber entrance. Her discipline was impressive despite serious injury. She maintained situational awareness even as she allowed her body to enter a recovery state. Cade returned to the communications console, adjusting the signal and recording a standard distress message with their coordinates. The chances of it being received were slim, but it was their best hope. As he worked, he found his thoughts returning to the strange journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, half hoping each would be his last. The guilt of surviving when Lena and Mira hadn't was a constant weight. Now, perversely, he found himself desperately wanting to live, not just for himself, but for the alien warrior whose life had become intertwined with his. His gaze drifted to Sira, who appeared to be sleeping. In repose, with the fierce alertness temporarily subdued, She looked almost peaceful. It was hard to reconcile this wounded survivor with the engineered killing machine she'd been created to be, or with the breeding vessel she'd been conditioned to view herself as. Time passed slowly in the warm, humid chamber. Cade monitored the communication signal, made minor repairs to their equipment, and took inventory of their supplies. His ribs ached where the reclaimer had struck him, but nothing seemed broken, just deeply bruised. After